If you enjoy stories where humanity shocks the galaxy, don't forget to hit the like button, drop a comment with your favorite moment, and subscribe for more HFY tales every week. Your support helps bring these epic battles and quiet human victories to life. Now let's begin. The empires had many ways of describing it. Some called it the beast of silence. Others called it the apex that would not bow. In every archive, in every whispered account, the meaning was the same. A predator older than empires, feared even by the galaxy's mightiest and never once tamed. For centuries, it had vanished into myth, until reports surfaced from a forgotten frontier world, Earth's ragged neighbor on the edge of mapped space. The Galactic Council sent their envoys, not with curiosity, but with fear disguised as authority. If the predator was truly there, it would not remain unclaimed for long. Elias Cade knew nothing of galactic whispers. He was a man who had seen too many wars for someone barely into his 30s. A former soldier, discharged when humanity's usefulness to the empires waned, he had drifted out to the fringes with little more than his scars, a kit bag of tools, and a stubborn refusal to bend to anyone else's flag. His cabin was more patchwork than home, a squat structure of steel sheets, plasteel beams, and scavenged wiring. He made a living fixing broken haulers, patching hull plates, and bartering fuel filters for food. Quiet suited him. Silence was safer than the crack of gunfire he still sometimes heard in dreams. The silence was broken when the Empire's hunters came. Their ships thundered down through the clouds in a wedge formation, landing struts gouging the farmland outside the settlement. They were armored, efficient, and smug, their insignia etched in cold silver across their chest plates. Villagers stopped in their work, staring with weary dread. Hunters weren't soldiers, they didn't bring law. They brought chains. Elias had been stripping a fusion coil when the first troop passed through town. He watched from the doorway of a repair shed as the aliens sneered at the locals, their long jaws twisted in amusement. One shoved an old farmer aside, knocking him into the dust for daring to stand in their path. "This world harbors what is not yours to keep," one hunter announced, his voice carrying through a translator with a guttural hiss. "We take what cannot be trusted in human hands. The predator belongs to the Empire." The villagers exchanged nervous glances. Nobody spoke. Everyone had heard the tales. The predator wasn't something you hid. It was something you prayed never came near your fields. Yet rumor traveled fast in small colonies. Something had been seen near the northern ridge, something vast, fast, and deadly. Elias turned away, jaw clenched. None of this concerned him. He'd buried enough causes already. The Empire would sweep through, wreck a few homesteads, drag off whatever they wanted, and leave. That was their way. But later, when a young villager stumbled bleeding into his workshop, Elias found himself drawn back in. The boy had been caught in the hunter's search, beaten for not answering fast enough. Elias patched him up with the same quiet precision he'd once used in field hospitals, his hands remembering routines even when his heart wanted to stay detached. "They're killing animals near the ridge," the boy whispered hoarsely. "They think it's there. The beast. They say it won't bow." Elias dismissed him with a grunt, but the words lodged in his mind. He'd seen plenty of arrogant beasts toppled before, dictators, warlords, even human commanders who thought they were untouchable. None of them survived the weight of empires. Yet the way the hunters spoke, the fear they tried to mask with cruelty, told him this was something different. That night, curiosity led him further than caution. Rifle slung over his shoulder, he hiked into the northern forests. The settlement's lamps faded behind him until only the pale glow of twin moons lit his path. He found broken trees, scorched ground, and carcasses left where they had fallen. The hunters had made their sweep mercilessly. And then he found it. The predator was larger than any animal he had ever seen, a coiled mass of muscle and armored hide lying half-hidden in a hollow between boulders. Its breath came in low, guttural growls, every exhale laced with pain. One flank was scorched black from an energy bolt. Its eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, piercing, amber, unblinking. Elias froze, every instinct screaming at him to retreat. He knew what this thing could do. He'd heard the campfire tales soldiers passed around on lonely posts. Predators that ripped apart armored columns. Predators that shredded warlords who thought themselves conquerors. To approach was suicide. And yet it didn't lunge. It didn't roar. It just stared. Slowly, Elias lowered his rifle. His boots crunched the soil as he stepped closer, heart hammering. The predator's muscles rippled, ready to spring, but its eyes never left his. Something in its gaze wasn't hunger. It was testing. Measuring. "You're bleeding out," Elias muttered, voice low, steadying himself as much as addressing it. If I walk away, you die. If I stay, maybe we both die. Hell of a choice, huh? He crouched, pulling a field dressing kit from his pack. His hands trembled, but he forced them still, tearing open gauze with his teeth. The predator let out a deep, rattling growl. Elias ignored it, pressing the dressing against the scorched wound. The beast shuddered but didn't strike. Its head lowered fractionally as though conceding. Elias's breath caught. He treated men with less patience than this. Behind him, a distant shout cut through the night. Hunters. They were sweeping closer. Elias glanced back toward the treeline, then to the predator. He could leave it. Pretend he'd never seen it. Go back to his quiet life. The beast's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back to Elias. Not pleading. Not begging. Just waiting. Damn it, Elias muttered. He tightened the dressing, slung his rifle across his back, and jerked his head toward the ridge. If you're with me, don't eat me. The predator rose slowly, towering over him, silent as a shadow despite its size. For one terrible moment, Elias thought it might lunge. Instead, it fell into step behind him. The night swallowed them both as the hunters closed in on the trail of blood, never realizing the predator had already chosen its path. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed with his rifle across his knees, staring at the hulking shadow that filled half the cabin. The predator lay stretched along the floorboards, its armored hide gleaming faintly in the dim light. It hadn't moved since curling down there, as though the wooden planks were no different from the stone hollows it must have known. Only the slow rise and fall of its chest, and the occasional low growl in its throat, reminded Elias it was alive. He told himself he would only keep it for the night. Just long enough for the hunters to sweep past. Then he would push it back into the forest and return to his quiet, uneventful life. But when dawn broke, he found himself kneeling beside it with a damp rag, carefully cleaning the wound he'd dressed hours before. The predator's eyes flicked open, glowing gold in the pale light. For a moment Elias braced for claws and teeth, but instead it gave a low, rumbling huff and allowed him to work. You're a stubborn one, he muttered. Could have ripped me apart but you didn't. Could have run but you followed me home. I don't know what you want, but I know trouble when I see it. The beast blinked, slow and deliberate, then closed its eyes again. Elias almost laughed. He had seen hardened soldiers resist treatment with more fight than this. Outside, life in the settlement was unraveling. The Empire's hunters marched through fields, pulling down fences, interrogating families, killing livestock in their search. Whispers of the predator's survival spread quickly, whispered in fearful tones across every doorstep. To most, the beast was a curse. To the hunters, it was a prize. And now it lay in Elias's cabin, quiet as a house cat beside his bed. Elias knew better than to believe it would last. By mid-morning, he saw fresh tracks in the dirt road leading toward his property, three-toed imprints from Empire boots. They were close. Too close. He set a hand on his rifle and glanced at the predator. If they find you here, we're both finished. The predator's head lifted slowly, ears twitching toward the distant sounds of shouts and metallic clatter. Elias felt an uneasy certainty settle in him. The beast understood. Maybe not his words, but the tone, the urgency. It rose silently, towering over him, then padded to the door with a grace that belied its size. Its head brushed the frame as it slipped outside, melting into the treeline. When the hunters arrived, they found only Elias in the cabin, bent over his tools. Their leader, a tall, scaled brute with a voice like gravel, stepped inside and swept the room with glowing sensors. You, the hunter barked. We tracked blood to this place. What did you see? Elias didn't look up. Blood? Out here? You'll find plenty. Settlers butcher animals every day. Maybe your trackers don't know the difference. The alien snarled, shoving him against the wall. The force rattled his bones, but Elias's gaze didn't waver. He had been pushed around by worse than this. If you are lying human, you will not die quickly, the hunter growled. Funny, Elias said dryly. I was about to say the same. Before the alien could respond, a guttural snarl tore through the air. The predator exploded from the treeline, a blur of muscle and shadow. It slammed into the hunter, tearing him from the doorway with bone-crushing force. The other troops stumbled back, weapons raised, but none fired fast enough. In two brutal strikes, the predator shredded armor like cloth. Elias raised his rifle but didn't shoot. His finger hovered on the trigger, but the words that came out were sharp, commanding, enough. The predator froze mid-strike, claws buried in the earth beside a cowering trooper. Its chest heaved, its teeth bared, but it didn't finish the kill. Slowly it drew back, rumbling like distant thunder. The trooper scrambled away, tripping over himself in his haste to flee. Elias stared stunned. It had listened. The apex predator of 100 bloody legends, feared by empires, had stopped when he told it to. That was no accident. That was choice. The hunters retreated, dragging their injured leader, leaving only the churned soil and the coppery tang of blood in the air. Elias stood in the doorway, breath ragged. The predator stalked back toward him, head low, shoulders rippling with restrained violence. For the first time, Elias felt something more than fear, responsibility. Inside, the cabin felt too small for the both of them. Elias sank into his chair, rifle across his lap, while the predator circled once and settled heavily against the bed again. Its amber eyes glowed in the dimness, watching him. "Why me?" Elias asked quietly. "You don't bow to empires. You don't obey kings. But you listen to me." The predator blinked once, slow and deliberate. Elias exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. He didn't need an answer. He already knew what this meant. By nightfall, the first reports had already reached the wider galaxy. A battered scout drone, fleeing the carnage at the settlement, carried footage back to the council. Grainy images showed the impossible, the predator halting mid-strike at a human's command. Rumors spread like wildfire through channels the Empire couldn't hope to contain. Citizens whispered in astonishment, soldiers muttered in disbelief, and rulers felt the tremor of fear they hadn't known in centuries. If the predator bowed to no empire, but listened to a human, what did that make humanity? Elias didn't know of the whispers, not yet. He only knew his quiet life was over. He sat awake long into the night, listening to the predator's steady breathing beside his bed, knowing that every second it stayed, the Empire's noose would tighten. Yet he couldn't bring himself to push it away. The beast had chosen him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that choice would echo across the stars. The days that followed turned Elias into the center of a storm he hadn't asked for. Word of the predator's survival raced through the settlement like fire through dry grass. Some whispered he had tamed it, others said he had bargained with death itself, but all eyes turned to him with a mix of awe and fear. Elias ignored them. He had lived his life with little interest in being anyone's savior. Yet the truth was impossible to ignore. The predator followed him. Whether hunting silently at the edge of the forest or curling up on the floorboards of his cabin, it moved with a loyalty that defied everything the empires had claimed about it. The Empire's response was swift. Patrol ships circled above, their dark hulls casting long shadows over the settlement. More hunters poured in, accompanied now by Imperial officers in gleaming armor who wore their arrogance like a second skin. They set up checkpoints, seized livestock, and searched homes with the authority of conquerors. To them, the villagers were vermin in the path of their prize. And Elias, whether he liked it or not, was the obstruction they couldn't ignore. One evening, as the twin suns bled orange across the horizon, a detachment of troops marched to his cabin. Elias was outside, mending a water pump, when the squad fanned out in a semicircle around him. Their leader, a tall officer with obsidian eyes and a voice honed to command, stepped forward. "Human," the officer said coldly, "you shelter the beast. You will surrender it or you will die with it." Elias straightened slowly, wiping grease from his hands. "If I had it, you wouldn't be standing here. You'd be fertilizer under its claws." The officer's expression didn't change. He raised a hand and the squad leveled their weapons. Behind Elias, the cabin door creaked. The predator stepped into view, its frame filling the doorway, eyes burning with silent menace. The soldiers flinched despite their training, their muzzles wavering under the weight of its stare. The officer hesitated. "So it is true." His tone was edged with disbelief. "The predator that bowed to no empire listens to a man." Elias felt the weight of every gaze on him, human and alien alike. He thought of walking away, of leaving the beast to its fate, but the thought curdled in his gut. He'd done enough running in his life. He met the officer's gaze squarely. "It chose me. You'll have to kill me first." The predator's low growl rolled through the clearing like distant thunder, a sound that promised violence with every note. The officer gestured sharply and the squad opened fire. The air lit with bolts of searing plasma. Elias dove behind the water pump as shots hammered the ground. The predator moved like a storm unleashed, crossing the distance in a blur. Armor plates split like paper, screams echoed, and the soil ran dark. Elias lifted his rifle, picked a target, and fired with the cold precision of a soldier who had long since accepted the cost of pulling a trigger. 1, 2, 3 dropped in quick succession, their bodies crumpling in the dust. "Stand down." Elias roared, but the predator was already in the thick of them, claws flashing, jaws crushing. The squad broke, some fleeing, others firing blindly as panic overtook training. The officer tried to rally them, shouting commands, but the predator lunged, pinning him to the earth with talons poised over his throat. Elias's chest heaved as he lowered his rifle. This was slaughter, and it would stain the settlement with blood he couldn't wash away. His voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding, "Stop!" For one long heartbeat, the predator hovered on the brink of finishing the kill. Then slowly it drew back, leaving the officer gasping in the dirt. The survivors scrambled to retreat, dragging their commander with them. The clearing fell silent save for the rasp of Elias's breath and the predator's steady growl. He turned, meeting its eyes. "You listened?" Again. The beast huffed, a sound almost like agreement, then padded back toward the cabin. Elias stood rooted in place, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. The predator hadn't just obeyed. It had obeyed him in the face of bloodlust. That bond was real, undeniable, and dangerous. By the next day the footage spread. A villager, terrified but desperate for leverage, had captured the entire confrontation on a hidden recorder. The clip raced across Imperial channels and rebel broadcasts alike. The predator, mid-slaughter, halting at a single human command. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Commentators shouted over one another, calling it fake, calling it heresy, calling it proof that humanity carried a power the empires could not control. In the council's grand chambers, alien delegates erupted into chaos. Some demanded Elias's immediate execution, claiming humanity had become a contagion of rebellion. Others whispered of opportunity, that perhaps the predator's loyalty could be harnessed through him. But the overriding truth silenced them all. The predator had never yielded to chains, crowns, or empires. And yet it curled at the feet of a man no throne commanded. Elias knew nothing of their debates. He knew only that the village had grown quieter, every eye on him heavy with fear and expectation. Some neighbors avoided his gaze altogether, unwilling to share the fate they were sure would fall on him. Others lingered near his cabin, watching the predator with awe, daring to believe that if such a beast could stand with a human, maybe humans weren't as powerless as the galaxy believed. That night, Elias sat on his porch with his rifle across his knees, the predator lying at his feet like a shadow given flesh. He stared at the horizon where the Empire's ships glowed faintly against the stars. He had lived his life trying to escape the weight of war, but war had found him again, dressed in alien steel and Empire arrogance. "You're going to get me killed?" he murmured, glancing at the beast. It blinked slowly, unbothered. Elias sighed, leaning back against the cabin wall. "But if they come again, we stand together. Deal?" The predator lowered its head, curling closer, its breathing deep and steady. Elias closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. He knew this was only the beginning. The Empire wouldn't stop. The Council wouldn't ignore him. And the galaxy had just seen a predator bow not to crowns or empires, but to a human voice. It was a truth that would ripple through every corner of known space, and Elias had no illusions about what that meant. The next storm was already gathering, and this time, it would not be a squat at his door. The sky split open with fire. Imperial warships bled from orbit, their engines a low roar that rattled the glass panes of every cabin and set livestock into a frenzy. Elias stood in the field outside his home, rifle slung across his shoulder, and watched them descend like vultures circling carrion. This was no patrol. This was an invasion force. The Empire had tired of whispers and rumors. Now they had come with all the weight of authority to crush a man and the beast that walked beside him. The predator paced at his side, restless, its armored hide catching the last streaks of sunset. It could smell the ships before they even touched down, nostrils flaring, muscles taut. Elias reached down, brushing his hand against the ridged plates of its neck. The gesture was not to calm it, but to steady himself. "Looks like we're done hiding," he muttered. When the first transports landed on the settlement's outskirts, the villagers gathered in frightened knots, whispering prayers or clutching crude weapons they knew wouldn't matter. Soldiers poured out in disciplined ranks, their armor gleaming, banners unfurled. Behind them came warlords draped in trophies, mercenary captains with cruel eyes, and hired assassins who moved like shadows even in the fading light. The Empire wasn't just here to capture a beast. They had come to make an example, to burn the idea of human defiance out of every watching world. Elias felt their fear pressing against his own spine, but he didn't let it show. He walked back into his cabin, checking his traps one last time. The fields beyond were wired with explosives pulled from dismantled mining charges. Sharp stakes waited at choke points, and hidden pits yawned beneath false earth. His hands had worked feverishly for days, every motion driven by the knowledge that this hour would come. He had no illusions about winning. But if the Empire wanted his life, they would choke on the cost of taking it. The Predator had helped in its own way. Scouts sent to probe the outskirts never returned. Their screams had carried faintly through the trees, brief and cut short. The villagers knew now that the beast was not a curse. It was their shield. For the first time, some looked at Elias with something more than fear. A spark of belief flickered in their eyes, fragile but real. The ground shook as the main column advanced. Floodlights washed across the settlement, turning night into day. A voice thundered from loudspeakers, imperial diction sharp and merciless. Surrender the predator and the human who harbors it, and your lives may yet be spared. Resist and you will be ash beneath our boots. Elias stepped forward into the light. His heart pounded, but his voice carried clear and steady. You already know my answer. The predator growled, a sound that silenced even the most arrogant laughter in the imperial ranks. For a heartbeat, the night held its breath. Then the first volley screamed through the air. Explosions ripped the earth as plasma bolts struck, but Elias's traps answered. Charges detonated beneath advancing lines, tearing gaps in their formation. Troops scattered, shouting as the ground betrayed them. The predator surged into the chaos, a blur of claws and teeth, cutting through armored soldiers like dry grass before a scythe. Elias moved with it, rifle barking precise shots, each one finding a gap in armor or a visor slit. He was no longer the mechanic who patched water pumps and bargained over fuel filters. He was the soldier again, the man who had once survived wars humanity was never meant to win. The villagers, emboldened by the sight, rose from hiding with makeshift weapons. Arrows loosed, stones hurled, blades swung. Against the Empire's steel they were little more than gnats, but their courage mattered. It slowed the tide, gave Elias and the predator room to strike. And every villager who fought beside him proved that this was no longer just his battle. It was theirs. The first wave fell, broken and bleeding, but the Empire was endless. More troops poured forward, backed by towering war machines whose cannons lit the sky. One of them leveled its barrel at Elias, the glow of its charge reflecting in his eyes. He dove aside as the blast obliterated the cabin behind him, splintering wood and shattering the life he had built piece by piece. The predator roared, leaping onto the machine with primal fury. Its claws tore into plating, ripping cables free, sparks showering the ground. The machine staggered, stumbled, and collapsed in a thunder of metal. The beast dropped beside Elias, bloodied but unbowed, eyes burning with a fury that matched his own. Then came the warlord. Clad in ornate armor, taller than any soldier around him, he strode through the carnage with a blade that shimmered with crackling energy. His voice boomed, mocking. So this is the human who commands the uncommandable. You are no king. You are no general. You are nothing. Elias lifted his rifle, but the warlord swatted the shot aside with his blade. The blow that followed knocked Elias sprawling, pain flaring across his ribs. The warlord loomed above him, weapon raised to strike the killing blow. The predator lunged, intercepting the strike. The blade bit deep into its flank, and a roar of agony shook the air. It crashed against the warlord, tearing armor, driving him back, but the wound was grievous. Blood poured dark and hot onto the soil. Elias staggered to his feet, fury igniting in his veins. He snatched a blade from a fallen soldier, his grip sure, his stance steady. He charged, striking low, driving the weapon beneath the warlord's armor. The alien howled, stumbling back under the combined assault of man and beast. The predator, despite its wound, finished the fight with a final, savage strike that dropped the warlord into the dirt, unmoving. The battlefield stilled. Soldiers hesitated, staring at the fallen commander, at the predator bleeding yet still standing, at the human who refused to break. In that moment, the Empire's myth of invincibility cracked. The survivors began to retreat, dragging their dead and wounded, their discipline shattered. The villagers cheered, voices ragged with exhaustion and disbelief. Against impossible odds they had stood, and the Empire had faltered. Elias sank to his knees beside the predator, pressing his hands against the bleeding wound. "Stay with me," he whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare give up now." The predator's eyes met his, glowing faintly even through the haze of pain. It lowered its head, curling weakly beside him, its massive form trembling but alive. Elias held on, refusing to let go, his chest heaving with the weight of everything they had survived. The night was far from over. The Empire would return, stronger, angrier, unwilling to let this humiliation stand. But for now they had won a victory no one thought possible. The predator had fought not for itself, not for empires, but for him. And across the stars, whispers would carry the truth. The beast that bowed to no empire bled for a man. The predator lay curled in the dim light of dawn, its massive frame rising and falling with shallow, uneven breaths. Elias had not slept. He sat beside it, his back pressed against the ruined wall of what had once been his cabin, every muscle taut with exhaustion and fear. His hands were still sticky with blood, his shirt stiff with grime, but he refused to leave the beast's side. He could not. It had fought until its body nearly broke, not for itself but for him. That truth weighed heavier than the Empire's shadow. The village stirred cautiously around them. Survivors walked among wreckage, dragging debris, binding wounds, whispering thanks to a man they once feared as much as the creature at his side. Children peeked around corners, staring wide-eyed not at the predator but at Elias, as though seeing him for the first time. He felt the shift like a tremor through the earth, fear transformed into fragile faith. But it was faith balanced on a knife's edge. The Empire would return, and when it did, faith alone would not hold. A groan echoed from the beast's chest, deep and pained. Elias leaned closer, resting a steadying hand against its armored hide. "I'm here," he whispered. "You're not going anywhere, not while I still breathe." The predator's golden eyes flickered open, unfocused, then fixed on him with the same unyielding intensity it had shown on the battlefield. There was no bowing, no servitude in that gaze. There was only choice. The ground rumbled again, not from the predator's breath but from engines. Elias stiffened. On the horizon, a dark silhouette rose. Another Imperial ship, sleek and jagged, descending like a knife toward the wound already carved into the land. Panic rippled through the villagers. They clutched one another, voices sharp with terror. Some begged Elias to flee, to hide, to take the predator and vanish into the wilds before the Empire crushed them all. Elias stood slowly, his body aching but his voice steady. "If we run, they'll hunt us. If we hide, they'll burn everything in their path. The only way this ends is if we make them bleed so badly that others see their weakness." His words seemed impossible, reckless, but they carried weight because he had already done the unthinkable. He had survived what should have killed him a dozen times over. The villagers, desperate and trembling, clung to his defiance like a lifeline. The ship landed with a roar, kicking up a storm of dust and ash. Its bay doors split open, and out marched not the endless ranks of soldiers this time, but a delegation. At their head strode a man cloaked in black, armor traced with symbols of command. His presence bent the air around him. Even the predators of distant worlds bowed when this figure appeared. He was not a warlord. He was an executor of the Empire, the kind sent only when humiliation had to be erased in blood. Human, the executor's voice carried like iron struck against stone. "You have slain my soldiers. You have mocked my banner. And worst of all, you have bent the will of what cannot be bent. That beast is a weapon of empire, not a toy for a backwater savage. You will hand it over and die cleanly. Or you will watch as I salt this ground with the bones of your kind." Elias felt the predator shift weakly beside him, its growl low but defiant. He looked from the executor to the villagers huddled in terror. His ribs ached with every breath, and his vision swam with fatigue, but his voice did not waver. "You want it? Then come take it." The executor stepped forward, drawing a blade that hummed with energy so intense the air rippled around it. He moved like lightning, too fast for a man so heavily armored, and Elias barely parried the first strike with a scavenged blade. The impact jarred his bones, numbing his arm. He staggered back, each breath of fire in his lungs. The predator tried to rise, but its wounds dragged it down. It snarled in frustration, claws gouging the dirt as it struggled to stand. Elias shot it a look, sharp and pleading. "Stay down. This is my fight." The duel raged across the broken earth, every clash of blades showering sparks. The executor fought with precision honed by centuries of conquest, while Elias fought with desperation, instinct, and the raw memory of every battle humanity had survived against odds like these. He was outmatched in strength and speed, but he had something the executor did not: refusal. A refusal to yield, to bend, to break. The villagers watched, hearts hammering in unison with each strike. They saw a man fighting not just for a beast, not just for himself, but for them all. Every parry, every gasp, every stagger was theirs as much as his. The predator's growls became a rhythm behind him, its loyalty an unspoken shield that kept him moving when his body screamed to fall. At last the executor's blade cut deep across Elias's arm, searing flesh to the bone. Pain blinded him, his weapon slipping from numb fingers. The executor raised his sword for the killing blow. The Empire's judgment was about to fall. Then the predator rose. Bleeding, trembling, barely able to stand, it surged forward with a roar that split the sky. It struck the executor full force, claws tearing, jaws snapping. Armor cracked beneath its fury, and for the first time the executor faltered. Elias seized the moment, staggering to his feet, grabbing a fallen rifle. With every ounce of strength left in him, he fired point-blank into the exposed gap of the executor's helm. The blast echoed like thunder. The executor reeled, staggered, and fell, his lifeless body crashing into the dirt. Silence followed, heavy and disbelieving. The villagers erupted, their cries shaking the air. Not of fear this time, but of victory. They surged forward, surrounding Elias and the predator, voices uniting in a single truth: the Empire was not invincible. Elias dropped to his knees, exhaustion nearly breaking him. The predator collapsed beside him, curling against his side, its golden eyes half-lidded but unyielding. Elias rested his head against its armored hide, tears cutting through the dirt on his face. "We're still here," he whispered. "And that means they can't break us." Above them, the Empire's ship sat silent, its crew frozen by the impossible sight of their executor fallen. Across the galaxy, whispers would already be spreading, carried on smuggler routes and rebel channels. A predator that bowed to no empire lay curled beside a human's bed, choosing loyalty not by chains but by bond. It was not just survival anymore. It was a spark. And sparks could burn empires. Elias closed his eyes, hands still resting on the predator's side, as the first light of dawn spread across the battlefield. The war was far from over. But together they had already rewritten the rules.